pass over to Louise Mapstone from Buckinghamshire Council, first of all, to introduce Nick and the project and how they got involved. So thanks, Louise.
Sure. Thank you. Yeah, thank you. Hello. Morning, everybody. Yeah. So for those of you who don't know me, I'm Louise Mapstone, Biodiversity Net Gain Officer at Buckinghamshire Council. And we've been supporting Oxford Archaeology and Historic England on their project relating to better biodiversity net gain. And for those of you who don't know, I run the Habitat Bank Regulation Service here at Buckinghamshire Council. And as part of that work, and we sit in our team here in a group of environmental specialists, including archaeologists and arboriculturalists and landscape specialists. And as we were sort of setting up our Habitat Bank Regulation Service, we as an authority wanted to ensure that we were considering not just the ecological implications, but also wider environmental implications. And we sort of started talking to our archaeologists in-house, and were contacted also by Oxford Archaeology around, how is archaeology considered in BNG? Because when it falls outside of the planning remit, there's not necessarily a requirement for this to be considered in a sort of structured way. And so we started consulting all of our archaeologists for our habitat banks, and so I'll pass over to Nick in terms of his work. And I think what we're really keen to understand is how we can work together as sort of joint professionals, delivering biodiversity net gain that works for both ecology and for archaeology and for other environmental issues that you might find on a site, particularly when you're working for a local planning authority and that is your remit, is for the public good, and where you have these sites where there isn't any planning permission required. And what are those sort of synergies where we can work together to work for both, where can we sort of support archaeology and where can archaeology support us as we go through this process of biodiversity net gain. So I think that's a little intro for you, and I'll pass over to Nick, and it would be a really good presentation, so I'm looking forward to it. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Louise. Lovely to be here. Thank you. I was here about, I think it was maybe 13 or 14 months ago to introduce the project. It feels like it's absolutely flown by. So I'm going to share my screen so we can so I can show you. Can we see that? Has that come up?
Yeah. Yes, we can't see the presenter mode, but we can see this. Yeah, perfect.
Magic. Ready. Okay. So I've come back today to kind of give a summary of the results of our project. I'm going to start by talking a little bit about the background of the project for those of you that weren't here 14 months ago when I introduced it. And a big part of the project was a questionnaire that we sent out to as wide a range of BNG stakeholders as possible to try and map the current practice around BNG, particularly off-site BNG, and the historic environment. And then after I've presented those results, I'll kind of go into some of the wider things which Louise kindly has introduced already as to kind of where we can go next. So I'm from Oxford Archaeology, and this project was funded by Historic England, and I'm here presenting on the behalf of our project team. So that's myself, and then my colleagues Graham Clark and Anwyn Cooper, also from Oxford Archaeology. And we started this project, as Louise mentioned, because we were very interested to think about how off-site biodiversity net gain, the habitat creation and management involved in habitat in off-site BNG, how that interacts and relates to the historic environment. And in particular, we were quite interested to think about what degree the historic environment is actually considered when people are going about designing off-site BNG plans, and then to what degree is the historic environment being considered by people working in local authorities or responsible bodies when they're reviewing and ultimately approving these off-site BNG plans. Not only were we interested in the degree to which the historic environment as a thing is being considered, we were also interested to see the degree to which historic environment professionals were being involved in both the design and the review and approval process as well. And we were also very interested to try, in the process of the project, to try and identify what current challenges and obstacles exist to bring about, as Louise mentioned, that better synergy between different sectors and different practitioners, so we can deliver a BNG that is better for all elements of the environment. And so a big key part of our project to understand what's going on in current offsite BNG practice was a questionnaire. So we designed and then circulated a stakeholder questionnaire. It actually went through, there were 4 different questionnaires which were designed for different stakeholder groups. Some of them went to individuals who were practitioners involved in BNG design. And so we had separate questionnaires for historic environment practitioners, natural environment practitioners, and kind of wider stakeholder people involved in that as well. You can see here all the different institutions and groups that we sent that through. And then we also had questionnaires designed for historic and natural environment professionals that were working within local authorities and responsible bodies that were primarily involved in the review and approval of these offsite BNG designs. So when I came here last, we had just launched, in fact, it was my talk here that launched our questionnaire for the project. In total, we had over 160 responses, which was really great, which was a lovely number for us because it gave us a chance to do some interesting analysis. Thank you to everybody here that was here last time and did respond to that questionnaire. Everybody's opinions and views and ideas were really, really central to us formulating the ideas and the results that we created. So the key results are this. When we're thinking about BNG, offsite BNG projects being designed, we can see here that anybody that was involved in offsite BNG design was asked, is the historic environment, are historic environment professionals being included in the design? And you can see here that in 65% of the cases, people said no. So historic environment professionals are not a regular inclusion in BNG design teams. So that's the first interesting thing for us to notice. And we can see this, a relative lack of involvement and experience in offsite BNG across the different professions. So here you can see in this graph, you can see the vast majority of historic environment professionals we spoke to have been involved in 0 offsite BNG projects, whereas natural environment professionals and our wider stakeholders are things like land managers, landowners, land brokers, things like that. You can see that both of those, we have a higher proportion of them have been involved in more projects. And you can see that natural environment professionals, they're the only category where we're seeing individuals who have been involved in 10 or more projects. So there's definitely a uneven distribution of experience in BNG across these different practitioner groups, which is unsurprising given the fact that BNG is primarily concerned with the natural environment. So as well as thinking about which people are involved, we're also interested in kind of what elements of the environment are actually being brought into these projects. And here you can see that 61% of responders said that the historic environment as a thing was rarely or never considered in offsite BNG projects they had been involved in the process of designing it. And you can see that only 8% of respondents there said that the historic environment was always considered in projects that they were involved in designing. So this is sort of extending that general picture that the historic environment in general is not being regularly considered when people are designing offsite BNG projects. For those people that have been involved in project designs that had considered the historic environment, we asked them what types of historic environment assets were being included. You can see here that designated assets, so that's things like scheduled monuments, registered battlefields, all that kind of stuff. They were considered in nearly all of the respondents' cases, and that's not surprising given the fact that these are legally protected sites. So there is a legal requirement for these to be included as set out in the National Planning Policy Framework, section 214, I believe, only because I was reading that yesterday. I don't have a robotic memory of that. But you can see here that actually away from designated assets, Other types of assets are considered a lot less. So known non-designated assets are considered just under 70% of those instances. And then the other two bars there show that in the process of designing BNG, offsite BNG projects, very few of them are actually going out to try and identify whether there's any unknown historic assets on their land. So they're working with existing data sets, and even then, you know, under 70% of them are working with those existing data sets on non-designated assets. So it does feel primarily the historic environment is being included to the level that is required by current legislation, i.e. you have to consider designated assets, but the other stuff is falling through the cracks a little bit more. And we found from our interviews and our case studies that the inclusion of those non-designated assets and those people that are doing review, like trying to find new assets on the land, this is really being driven by individual people who feel that this is an important thing to do. This is not done because it's a requirement. So then we can go to the other side, and this may be more interesting to you all as people that are working in local authorities. The other side of the questionnaire was about looking at the approval process. So people working in either local authorities or responsible bodies, the degree to which historic environment assets were being included in the projects they're reviewing, and the degree to which historic environment professionals within local authorities or responsible bodies are being included in the review process. Here you can see that within local authorities or responsible bodies, 30% of people said that the historic environment professionals were involved in the review of that project. And there are a number of reasons for this, which I'll come to, which were provided by responders, and I'll come to those in a few slides' time. But the key takeaway there is, in most cases, historic environment professionals working within these local authorities or responsible bodies are not involved in the review process at all. You can see again this the graph on the left, that historic environment professionals working within those local authorities or responsible bodies have much lower levels of experience of reviewing and approving off-site BNG projects. The vast majority, and over 80% of the people that we surveyed, said that they haven't been involved in any review and approval process whatsoever. And you can see on the right-hand side there, only 6% of historic environment professionals working in LAs or RBs said that they felt adequately involved in the review and approval process. And then we also, like with the design, we asked people the degree to which the historic environment was being considered in the offsite BNG proposals that they were reviewing and then approving in some cases. And you can see again that the majority said that the historic environment was rarely or never considered. And on the right-hand side, you can see much the same. Those assets that were mostly considered are those designated assets with a legal requirement to be considered. The non-designated assets and the unknown assets that would be identified through either desk-based or in-field surveys are much, much, much lower. So the pattern is the same between those individuals who were surveyed involved in design and those individuals surveyed that are involved in the review of these projects. So the big pattern here is that the historic environment is not regularly considered in the design or the review process, both in terms of the historic assets themselves are not being considered, and historic environment professionals are not regularly included in either the design or the review process. Why is this? So we asked everybody and to offer some ideas of this, which included open text boxes. People who responded gave really frank, really detailed and incredibly valuable responses to this that gave us an insight into how current systems are impacting this process. One of the big things in terms of the reviewing and approval of offsite BNG projects was the issue of silo working in local authorities, where natural and historic environment professionals are working in separate departments, separate buildings. they're sometimes separated even further than that. Makes it very, very difficult to get the close working relationships needed to allow this interworking to consider both the historic and the natural environment in these offsite BNG plans. From the people that we spoke to, this was particularly an issue in two-tier authorities, where 30% of people that we reviewed from two-tier authorities said that they had no close working relationship with each other from the historic and the natural environments, and that's entirely because that they are split completely. When we asked people if they felt equipped to manage offsite BNG as it currently is, only 16% of people working in local authorities or responsible bodies said that they currently felt equipped. And you can see that graph on the right. It's kind of it's quite balanced, but a quarter of the people that we spoke to said that they felt that including the historic environment in the review of BNG projects would make it more difficult. A quarter equally said it would make no difference. A quarter said it would make it easier, and a quarter said that they really didn't know. So it's not as if the historic environment is being seen as a real problem, but clearly with a relatively new system, with a relatively new set of policies, which continues to change through consultations, and then asking for new things to be included in a landscape where the resources and funding are low, and there is a separation between natural and historic environment colleagues, it clearly is a really difficult thing. At no point in this project do I have any interest in trying to lay the blame on any individual or any set of practitioners. This is clearly an incredibly challenging situation. And what we are trying to do is find suggestions to make it as easy as possible to find positive solutions for everyone without saying that it's anybody's fault, because I don't think it is. It's a systemic thing as opposed to individuals. You're all working exceptionally hard. So I'm hopeful that we can find ways to work smarter instead of harder. And as an archaeologist and a historic environment professional, I see it as my job to make this easier for you to include the historic environment. So that's where we are at with our project. The key thing that came out as well is nearly everybody said that there is a complete lack of guidance on how to go about including the historic environment in offsite BNG project design, and how to consider it within the review of offsite BNG projects. So you can see 90% of people said they had no idea of any guidance that was out there, and only 4% of people said that current guidance was actually suitable. So it's an absolute minority. And really, in terms of people working in local authorities reviewing things, the guidance by Bucks is really the only stuff out there. So there is very little going on. The rest of our project was focused on looking at the relationship between habitats and habitat creation and the historic environment. Because the bottom line is, at the moment, if the historic environment is not being included widely in offsite BNG project design and review, there is a danger that historic environment assets may be being damaged by certain habitat creation practices involved in offsite BNG. But there is also clear potential that by not including in the historic environment, we're also missing opportunities where the historic environment can positively contribute to the nature recovery aims of offsite BNG. So our research did a lot of work. I spent a lot of time going through all of the available research and resources that identified on one side, so this is on the left-hand side of the slide, evidence where particular habitat creation practices or particular species can cause damage to particular historic environment assets. And this basically now exists as a library of our current understanding. So this should help people both in the design and the review phase to think about how proposed habitat creation may be problematic for identified historic assets that are on that site. But on the other side of the slide. And the key here is that we, as historic environment professionals, we don't want to be seen as just obstacles to nature recovery, because it's really important. Nature recovery is really important. BNG is very important. We do not want to be the people to come in and say, oh, well, you can't do that. That's a problem. So we want to try and find ways that identify the historic environment as a positive asset for nature recovery, not just a problem. And we found loads and loads of examples where particular historic environment assets are really, really good opportunities for boosting biodiversity, for creating biodiverse habitats. So some wonderful resources about modifications of dry stone walls for different ecological species, which are those diagrams on the top. In the bottom left, there is somebody hanging up some Hessian in a bricked up World War II pillbox. So that's a World War II pillbox conversion for bat roosting. On the right hand side there, that's the resurrection of historic farm agricultural ponds into new ponds, which actually very quickly become colonized by dormant historic plant seeds that were in the sediment. So they actually create historically accurate flora and fauna, particularly flora, communities within them. So there's loads and loads of opportunities here as well. So where we've come to with the project is that we can see that we need a greater consideration of the historic environment in off-site BNG design. And that's particularly, we need to think more about those non-designated assets and think about whether we can find ways to identify new assets on land. That's not just to avoid damage, that's also to identify potential extra opportunity for BNG and extra opportunity for biodiversity gain in general. To do that, we need to find ways to have a greater inclusion of historic environment professionals in both the design and the approval process. And so the finding ways to increase cross-working in all of these instances is a key priority, I see. And one of the things that I think is going to do that is the creation of clear and accessible guidance. So what to consider, why it should be considered, and how to go about considering it. These need to be tailored for the different BNG stakeholder groups. So they need to be resources for historic environment professionals. So we as a sector all are equipped with the understanding of how we can be most, we can deliver the most positive contributions to nature recovery that we can. So we're not an obstacle, but we're a force for good. We need those resources to be tailored to non-historic environment professionals, so everybody can understand what the issues are and how to go about finding solutions without it being too complicated, too detailed, too inaccessible. And one of the places that further guidance could be placed is within the template for the HMMP, which is something that we flagged up in our report. And there was a recent consultation on that template, and we contributed a response to that to say it would be very helpful if there could be a greater inclusion of the historic environment, which includes guidance on how to go about including it and guidance on why to include it. So these are the current things that we are thinking of. And a lot of these things fall on us as historic environment professionals to actually provide. So the next steps for all of this, which we see as being particularly important, the first thing is that the report that we've produced on this project is going to be out very, very soon. I'm doing the final corrections on it. So it's going to be open access and it's going to be free. It's going to be available through the Historic Environment website. It's going to include a review of all of the things that I've presented today, a full library of all of the potential impacts of habitat creation and the potential opportunities that historic assets provide for different habitat and species types. It also has a couple of really lovely case studies of, I'm not going to say best practice, but really nice examples of where the historic environment has been incorporated into off-site BNG plans. And these were created by some really lovely and frank interviews with different stakeholders so we can see how this process works. So hopefully all of that will be very useful. And then we need to think about the next things that we need to do. We certainly need to continue gathering knowledge about how the historic and the natural environment can be incorporated together. And I know for a fact that there is a lot of practitioner knowledge out there, i.e. things that people working in local authorities, working for so natural and historic environment professionals, people working in planning, they know a lot of things. They have a lot of experience of trying to think through these problems. And the solutions they've found to them are both brilliant and not published. So we need to find a ways to extract this information and this knowledge in a way that it can be made available for everyone. And that's one of the things I would really like to do going forward. We know that there are a few research gaps in terms of understanding how habitat types and historic environments relate to each other. So we would like to plug those gaps so we can provide better guidance for people thinking about these issues and relationships. And then we want to create bespoke resources for different stakeholders and their particular needs. So that is online, free and accessible resources, things like decision flow charts that allow you to think about what particular historic environment assets you might have, what particular things you need to watch out for in terms of impact, what particular opportunities there are, all of that kind of thing. And also a creation of a library of case studies to help people think through some of these issues. And we also see that cross-sector, cross-working training is going to be really, really important. So the next step that we would also like to do is work with a number of groups, people like Seaforth's Chartered Institute for Archaeologists, SIEM, Algea and Algae, Natural England, Historical England, I'm sure there's loads of other groups as well, to try and create training and teaching resources. So we as a group from a lot of different backgrounds and sectors can come together to share each other's understanding and knowledge, to find positive and creative solutions to make sure that the historic and the natural environment are brought together, and the results are positive for everyone. And finally, it would be great if we could move towards a greater inclusion of the historic environment in current legislation. It's something we're going to explore after the end of, once we've got this first phase of the project finished. The likelihood of that, I really don't know at the moment, but I think at least we could start pushing for stronger guidance in things like the HMMP template for the inclusion of the historic environment. And maybe we can go from there. I also have some much more wild pie in the sky ideas about what I would like to do, but that's probably for another future phase. I don't know if Historic England know how many phases of project we're intending to present to them. I hope they've got relatively deep pockets, because it's all really worthwhile and really important. So that's the end. That's a review of where we're at the moment, and we'll be able to share that report with you hopefully in the next couple of months when it comes out. So there we go. Thanks for listening, and happy, if there's space and time here, happy to take questions. If not, people can email me, and I'm happy to talk about all of this stuff.
Brilliant. That's really, really interesting, Nick. Thank you ever so much. Yeah, and really, I guess 2 points from me that I found really interesting is I've been working in nature for a long time now, and I know when I first started, the feeling was always that historic environment was, had good resourcing in local authorities, was really, there were always archaeologists, and it's interesting how that's declined, whereas the natural environment has increased. We always felt on the back foot as sort of ecologists, natural environment. So that's really interesting. I was also interested in whether you've spotted that there's a consultation national planning policy framework out, which I know has some changes on the historical environment. I haven't thought about it in relation to this. I did an event on it yesterday actually, but didn't sort of think, oh wait a minute, it relates to this. So there may be some hooks there as well that it might be worth drawing into your report. But yes, I think we've got time for a few questions if anyone wants to ask Nick anything, but then we'll probably let him go and sort of carry on with our usual drop-in meeting. Has anyone got any questions for Nick? If you put your hand up, then I can see you. Everyone's feeling very shy today. It's because your presentation was so you covered everything. So here we go, Victoria. When is the best point in the Habitat Bank Regulation Service process to reach out to our historic environment colleagues, or should this be for the applicant to undertake? Yeah, I don't know, Nick, and I guess Louise might want to come in on that one as well, because yeah,
I
do you want to
think
come in first, Nick?
from my perspective, the earlier the historic environment can be considered, the better. I think, because the earlier you consider it, the more chances you've got of identifying all of the assets that are there, and it gives you more time and space to think about how they can be incorporated into the habitat management monitoring plan, whichever way around that is. From the interviews and the questionnaires we did, people did raise the fact that if the historic environment is considered very late on in the process, what happens is somebody has their land, they design this HMMP, then they do the historic environment bit, and then they think, well, I can't do what I want to do because the historic environment is in the way. The late inclusion of the historic environment means that it's more likely to be seen as a blocker, which is a problem for us. If it's included right from the start with historic environment professionals, then you're much more likely to design an HMMP that right from the outset works within those constraints. And if you've got historic environment professional inclusion, hopefully they will give you good ways to include it as opposed to avoid it. A lot of the time we're hearing people are just saying, like, well, there's an asset there, we'll avoid that. There's an asset there, we'll avoid that. And then that makes the gland the area that can be dealt with for BNG too small to make it viable. Whereas actually those assets probably aren't blocking habitat creation. It's just that they haven't been considered in the right way, or the right guidance and the right expertise and advice haven't been involved. So from my perspective, the earlier the better, I think.
So it's allowing it to be integrated, and I guess it's the same as we always say as natural environment professionals as well. Get us involved as early as you can, so we can be integrated in the design. Did you want to come in on that one, Louise?
Sure. Yeah, I'm happy. Yeah, happy to. Yeah. So with our Habitat Bank Regulation Service, we do have a multidisciplinary panel that we kind of chat through all of our sites with, and this includes archaeologists as well as landscape professionals and planners, and actually our legal team as well. But obviously the challenge with that quite often, just because we're all so busy, is finding a time when everyone can make it. So I think what we're doing now is I'm kind of having a word with my colleague when something, exciting comes in, just so that I'm aware of what, might be if there are any issues, because I'm not an archaeologist, so I'm not aware of that. But then what we also do is part of our sort of our stage one of our process, where we review the proposals up to sort of the point of signature, is that we also include like an hour or so of fees for our archaeologist to have a look. So she'll read through the HMMP and what they've written in that section, and if they haven't written in that section, I will say, why haven't you written in that section, and have you considered it? And we always say from the outset, from our initial meeting, is that we will be also consulting our colleagues, and so we can, where we can work together on the proposals. I'm not saying it's always easy. There are definitely challenges with it, but we, it's certainly, like anything, BNG included, at the beginning of the process is when you need to get your professionals involved. And I appreciate that I'm in quite a lucky situation where we've got 3 archaeologists in-house, and that's not the situation that everybody's in, but it has worked for us in terms of being able to at least consider it and then pass over some possible case studies where it has worked well and where there's been some more challenges to, like, Nick and his team.
Brilliant, that's great. Thanks, Louise. Has anyone else got any questions for Nick and or Louise? No, I think we'll leave it. Oh, no. Yep. Edward, do you want to come in?
Hi there. Thanks for that. It was really interesting. I was just wondering, when you talked about bringing in historic environment or archaeology colleagues, say if we've got some potential habitat banks to set up, would you advise on bringing them in no matter what, or if you know it to not necessarily be a kind of heritage site of any kind, as far as we know, that it's not that important, or the interventions aren't that great, or should it just be a matter of course in your mind?
So we do ask that for everyone, just so you know. That's how we always get them to have a look, and it can be quite a quick process. It can be just like half an hour of their time, so it's not a huge amount of resource. But obviously, I appreciate I'm lucky. I'll pass over to Nick with his thoughts on the wider context beyond just my authority.
Thank you.
Yeah, I agree with everything you said, Louise. Yeah, I think including them as a matter of course is probably going to be an example of best practice there. As Louise said, sometimes there may be nothing there, or there may be nothing that's an issue. What I don't want you to take away from anything that I've said is to have an unrealistic picture of how damaging habitats can be to the archaeology. There are a number of habitat types which can be created and cause basically no impact to a wide range of historic environment assets. Sometimes you need to think a little bit about how you go about creating those assets. And so there is a difference between the habitat themselves and the means by which that habitat is created, which needs to be looked at. But some habitat types, so the creation of like species-rich grasslands on previously arable or agricultural land, probably will not deliver any sort of significant impacts to assets that are in that land. So that might be absolutely fine. But you may also find by talking to historic environment professionals that they may be able to flag up assets which offer ecological opportunities which maybe haven't been considered yet. So especially if BNG design is coming from a place where historic assets are a thing to be avoided and so haven't been included, a historic environment professional might be able to say, oh, well, like, did you know that this type of asset or this type of asset also has these kind of ecological opportunities? And so that's something that we've done in our report. And at the moment, I'm working to try and correlate the ecological opportunities that different historic assets have with UK HAB list categories, so they can clear lines can be drawn. It's not always easy, and it will need more doing to it. But so a clear line can be drawn between what we know as historic environment professionals and what ecologists and natural environment professionals are trying to do. You know, so if we can say, oh, well, did you know you've got a dilapidated farmhouse structure there? Did you know that could be considered as and then whatever UK HAB list, U1, whatever. That may be a way to start encouraging people to think about how things can be combined. So that's hopefully where our resources will equip historic environment professionals. So when you go and talk to them, they can then help that process as well.
That's really helpful. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thanks very much, Nick. Okay, I think we'll leave it there. And then we've got a chance for our usual sort of drop in if anyone's got any issues to raise. But thank you ever so much for your time, Nick. It's really, really interesting project. And as I said, I'll connect you with some other folk to hopefully be interested in hearing about it. But all the best for getting the report finished. And yes, we'd be really interested to get a link to that when it's finalised. And yeah, hopefully we can look forward to more collaboration between natural and historic environment professionals going forward. So yeah, nice to meet you, Nick.
Yeah, thank you all for your time, and I'll be sharing our results as soon as they're out.
Brilliant, lovely. Thanks very much.